Welcome back to the shop. In this video, we're going to talk about using stripper versus a heat gun to remove years of paint. So a little bit of backstory. I'm working on a project where we are restoring the beauty of a room in an antique cape. And one of the things we need to do is take down the wallpaper as well as clean up all the crown molding and woodwork throughout the room. As you can tell, there's a lot of it. So the question is, what's the best method to get rid of all this stuff? Well, our first step was to go through, remove all the wallpaper, and you can clearly see there's going to need to be some plaster work done. And then we moved on to the woodwork. Now, the woodwork in this room, we've actually used a heat gun because we didn't want to bring chemicals up into the house. And you can see that the heat gun did a great job removing the paint and showing the details of the beautiful crown molding as well as door and window trim throughout the house. There's also a couple of doors in the room, and we're going to bring those down to the shop. And the question is, what's going to work better, using a heat gun or using a stripper? Our first step is going to be to remove all the old hardware from the door, and it's been sitting there for a couple of decades, so we're going to take some care to remove it. If you notice, I actually turn the screw to tighten it first and then loosen it, and then the hardware easily comes off the door. But now the question remains, once we get the hardware off, which one is going to do a better job? A heat gun set at about 750 degrees or stripper? When you actually look at the door, you can see that there's years of paint and buildup that we want to get back to that fresh wood so we can get a good paint finish. The tools I'm going to use to remove the paint is a heat gun, of course, and a couple of scrapers and a respirator because this definitely has some lead paint on it. So we set the gun between 750 to 800 degrees and then went to work removing the paint. After a little more than an hour, we got the rails and stiles of the door stripped down to the bare wood, ready for some sanding. Now we've flipped the door over and we're going to do the exact same work except this time using the stripper. And we apply that very liberally and then wait about 15 to 20 minutes after the first application has been applied to see how much of the paint actually gets removed by the stripper. After waiting 15 to 20 minutes, we're starting to see the paint bubble. This is a really good thing. Let's see how much of the paint gets removed with this first application of stripper. Well, this first coat of stripper really cuts through that first layer of paint. Makes me think it's latex paint because it peeled off so easily. And can definitely tell there's a couple more layers of paint underneath that. So in order to save some time, what we'll do is while we're removing that first layer of paint, we'll apply another coat of stripper, let that sit in while we scrape off that first layer of paint. So we're now removing that second coat of stripper, and it's doing almost as good as a job as the first one, creating a little bit of a slurry as we remove it, but it's showing us another layer of paint underneath. So we're going to go through the same steps we did the last time. We'll go through, we'll remove this layer, and then we'll apply another coat of stripper to see if we can finally get down to that bare wood. All right, we're now removing the third coat, and we're going to apply a fourth coat because this one, again, just removed another layer of paint. And this is even more of a slurry as we kind of break down through the layers of paint, but we're still not down to the bare wood yet. So now we're removing that fourth coat of stripper. So far I'm about 2 hours into this process and I'm not down to the bare wood yet. I am starting to see glimpses of it as I go through. So we're going to call it quits for today and give it some thought as to whether or not it's good enough to sand, or should I apply a fifth coat of stripper and see if we can finally get down to that bare wood. So I gave it a lot of thought. Heat gun versus stripper. Well, it's clear the heat gun's a lot faster than the stripper, and it got me down to the bare wood a lot faster. And I'll just be able to sand that with a random orbital sander, get some 80 grit paper on there, and then ultimately up to probably 100, 150 before I put a finish coat of paint on it. The stripper, it was interesting. The stripper, it removed one layer of paint at a time. It was a lot slower. It was a lot messier. So it kind of created that slurry and that gloopy glop stuff that was there. So for the rest of the door, I'm going to use the heat gun. I'll probably finish off the side that I started with the stripper with the heat gun, and then do the center panels on the door with the heat gun as well. So that's what we used up in the house to remove all the paint from the woodwork and the crown molding, the door trims, the window trims, and it did a good job. Whichever method you use, you have to use proper PPE. You'll notice when I was using it, I was wearing a respirator, I was wearing gloves, because any of the fumes from the stripper, they're caustic. And chances are it was lead-based paint that was on that door. So I, again, want to make sure I'm using the respirator, have the air filter going in the shop, and make sure I'm doing proper cleanup at the end of the day so that those dust particles don't get trapped and walked around either in the shop or into the customer's home. So when would I use a heat gun versus a stripper? So I would use a heat gun on something like this, where it's not fine furniture. I know there's going to be a coat of paint that goes down on top of it, but I still want to get down to that bare wood and be able to sand. So use the heat gun for that. I would never use it on fine furniture, especially a piece that's been veneered. The heat from the heat gun, if you have it set at a high temp, and I had it between 850 degrees, could very easily melt the veneer or melt the glue that's holding the veneer on that table. And that would just peel right off and be a terrible mess to try and recuperate from. So never use it on fine furniture, definitely not use it on anything that's veneered. And even when you do use it, you want to be careful that you don't burn the wood, that you keep the gun moving, and that you make sure you have it set at a proper temperature. Hotter is not always better. You want to keep it at a good temp that gets the paint off, but not causing any scorching. Now, again, we talk a little bit about PPE, that when I was using the stripper, you noticed that I was dumping the scrapings into a plastic jug. Well, that plastic jug went outside when I was done for the day. I was not going to leave that in the shop. A lot of chemicals, when they are drying, they actually dry via heat and can become combustible. So by that way, I get it outside, away from any trees, bushes, the house, anything, that if it did ever heat up, that it wouldn't catch on fire and cause any damage to the home. If I'm going to use chemicals in the shop and I'm using rags, I always lay those rags out, or either dunk them in water over in the sink, or I lay them out, let them dry. Never kind of bunch them up and just throw them in a pile, because again, those things heat up, and it's from that heat that can make it combustible and create a tragedy of a fire. So always be careful whenever using any chemicals in the shop. Always use your PPE, and always be safe whenever you're working on stuff. So I got some more work to do. I'm going to get the rest of the paint off this door, finish the door moldings and the window trims and the crown molding up in the house, and get a coat of paint on there. So hopefully this was helpful for you, that if you're going to be doing any type of work, you need to remove layers of paint, you can make a decision which one's going to be better for you. Be able to use a heat gun, or to be able to use a stripper. So thanks for tuning into the shop. And as always, if you have any questions, please comment below. And I appreciate you subscribing to the channel. Thank you.